Hello, my beautiful people. My name is Dr. Cartel. Welcome to another episode of Basic Nigerian History. Let's get started. Now, last episode, we discussed Nigeria's first taste of independence and the issues that were immediately obvious to the new republic. This episode, we're going to discuss how politics worked and operated in this new republic and how the federal system that had attempted to solidify the regional divisions devolved into complete dysfunction. In 1962, the government introduced the FNDP, which was the first National Development Plan. Told you it was going to be acronym heaven from here on out. Anyways, the FNDP was designed to go on until 1968. It was set to improve industry, agriculture, and education, kinda like the previous plan, but focus more on manufacturing power of the country instead of the export power, so as to become truly economically independent. The budget for the plan was around 2,366 million, and this was at a time when Naira was more or less equal to the British pound. However, there was a decline in agriculture due to the labor force constantly decreasing as more and more young people left the farms and the rural areas for the cities. This might be because, as we mentioned in the previous episode, the rural areas were largely ignored by the government and investments focused more on the cities, so that's where the young people saw opportunities. Furthermore, private agricultural investments were also declining. All in all, this meant Nigeria had to start importing more food, which was bad for the economic independence that they were trying to achieve. In addition, Nigeria was heavily reliant on the foreign investments to fund their development projects. You can see this in the numbers. At the time, there was about 110 firms with a combined value of 28 million owned by foreigners, whereas native Nigerians only owned 52 firms with a combined value of about 4 million naira. The FNDP called for 50% of the budget to be raised through foreign investments, but by 1967, only 14% had been raised. The foreign public investments did not happen because of Nigeria's political instability. Which political instability, I hear you say? You haven't mentioned any such thing yet, Dr. Cartel. Well, just wait. It's coming. Currently, we are still in 1962. Soon, you will see how things go from bad to worse. The NPC-NCNC coalition that governed from 1959 was largely dominated by the MPC, and they focused specifically on improving conditions in the northern regions within the federations. They handed out promotions and appointments to underqualified northerners instead of southerners in an effort to have an equal number of people from each region in the public service sector. In the army, the quota had been 50% of the soldiers were from the north, 25% were from the southeast, and another 25% from the southwest. However, the British had mainly made southern soldiers officers because they were educated, and so by the time that they left, the Nigerian army had mostly northern soldiers with southern officers and leaders. There were especially a lot of Igbo soldiers amongst the leaders. MPC wanted to change this by making sure the quota for officers were also 50% north and 50% south, even if they were unqualified. People were getting promoted on ethnicity instead of merit. This was the beginning of what was going to be a big issue. The bulk of the first National Development Plan allocations were directed to the north. Niger Dam projects took over 10% of the budget, which was over roughly 88 million pounds. NCNC was not happy about this at all, and neither was AG, but the MPC argued that the northern region deserved the chance to catch up after such neglect at the hands of the British. The southern politicians, however, saw it as a domination plan. In 1962, just 2 years after the independence, a faction arose in AG under Ladoke Akintola, who was at that point the premier of the West. This new faction wanted to also join the governing coalition. They were afraid of AG becoming redundant, and they wanted to have a say for Yoruba people and the businesses in the new government. The Prime Minister agreed and sought to have AG join the governing coalition. In May of 1962, however, Obafemi Awolowo, who was the leader of the AG, disagreed with this. He wanted the western region to be self-sufficient so that there would be no need for the MPC in the west. He sought to replace Akintola, but when the Western Parliament met to formalize the change, Akintola's supporters rioted and started a fight. Every time the Western parliaments tried to meet, similar fights and disturbances broke out. This gave the West a reputation for violence, chaos, and rigged elections. In the same year of 1962, Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa saw this as a chance to gain a foothold in the West. He declared martial law in the West, suspended AG for 6 months, and arrested Awolowo and other members of his faction. He charged them with treason. 6 months later, Akintola was appointed to head the coalition government in the western region of Nigeria. Akintola called his new coalition the UPP, another acronym, the United People's Party, and formed a coalition with the NCNC in the east. AG became a minority in its own western stronghold. Can you imagine? In order to combat the large number of seats given to the northerners in the parliament, the southern regions manipulated the nationwide census to get more seats in the parliament and more revenue sharing positions. The numbers were suddenly showing an incredible 70% increase of population in the south and only 30% in the north. They were like, we have more people than you guys now, so we need more seats. This was obviously a lie. An MPC rejected the results of the census, ordering another census the next year. In 1963, Nigeria became the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Nnamdi Azikiwe's role changed from head of state to becoming the first president of Nigeria. Once again, this was a largely ceremonial presence, as the real executive power stayed with the Prime Minister and his cabinet. Around the same time, the Midwestern regions had been carved out of the Western region, further weakening AG and creating a new political unit. Soon, most minority parties realized there was little to be gained by joining MPC from the way they treated NCNC and AG. They figured the best way to gain power was to attack. They began to promote and exaggerate the fear of northern domination. Political parties in each region fought bitterly and did anything they could to gain and keep power in both the federal and the regional assemblies. The parties fought for power on the federal level so that they could distribute government resources amongst themselves and their supporters. But regional power was also important. For example, regional governments collected import and export taxes and consistently underpaid producers for their goods so that they had huge annual surpluses for development projects. Parties with the most control of the region could then decide where these development projects would take place and which ones would be prioritized and who would get the contract and so on. Politicians and political parties themselves used corruption, rigged elections, ethnic baiting, bullying, and thuggery to acquire and stay in power. This created fear in normal Nigerians. Regional identity became stronger than national identity. They all began to fear that their region would become dominated by another region. For example, the South feared that MPC would divert all the resources to the North and Islamicize the whole country. The North feared that the South would do the same and stop them from becoming more educated so they couldn't rival the South. Fears got in the way of any sense of national unity, led to even some dirty tricks being used in the upcoming 1964-1965 elections. In the end, Nigerians believed the federal system was dysfunctional and Nigeria in its current form made no sense. In 1963, the next census was done and the results showed that the North's population had also grown at the same pace of the South, with some new 8 million Northerners suddenly being discovered out of nowhere. Basically, by this time, everyone was lying and cheating. The result was denounced by all the other parties. NCNC in particular bitterly opposed it, but no one could stop MPC from making it official. Akintola, who was in the pocket of the MPC, accepted the figures for the West, and the newly formed Midwestern region reluctantly accepted it for the sake of unity. Can I just take a moment to point out that this Akintola man was a very unsavory character, a real green snake under the green grass. I mean, he's just so sly. This was the same guy that was kissing up to the British and trying to sabotage the Great General Strike of 1945, when all of Nigeria, North, West, East, came together to fight against the Europeans. He was going around trying to disrupt the organized efforts of our people. Only God knows why Awolowo accepted him into the AG, because he only went and started a mutiny, ruining the strength and unity of the party. And then finally, he sells out the West to MPC. From what I can see, he is the type of person that has no loyalty except to money. But I guess that's what all Nigerian politicians are like nowadays. Okay, rant over. Back to the topic. The new Nigerian population officially stood at 55,620,000 something, with over 29 million being from the north. So federal representation and revenues continued to favor the north. What this did was show Nigerians the extent to which all the governments were willing to lie and cheat in order to get and keep political power. And that's it for this episode though. Let's put a pause to it there and we continue next time. Just a recap of what we learned. In this episode, we learned how the different political parties started cheating and lying and realizing that all they really cared about was their respective ethnic groups instead of trying to form a working Nigeria. This was because the North started funneling all the money into the North and they were scared that the South wouldn't let them be as educated, so they started hiring based on ethnicity instead of merit. The South at the same time were very afraid of that, so they started cheating and increasing the numbers of their censors. All kinds of manipulations was going on, but this is going to be the story of Nigerian politics as we continue, because you're going to see more and more and it's just going to get worse. Anyways, stay tuned for the next episode. As usual, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification button, comment, share it with friends. Also, if you want to support us, our Patreon is in the description below. Thank you very much. Let's get out.